Welcome to the Binge Eating to Food Freedom podcast for driven hearts and minds. If you pour your best self into everything you do, and yet food takes up so much energy that it pulls you away from what matters most, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Papo, and I'm here to help you create a healthy relationship with food that supports you to live your highest and best life. And for an extra edge, become a Food Freedom Insider. Each week, I'll give you free, practical wisdom you can actually use in your daily life and more. Just head to katiepapo.com/resources or check the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about self-sabotage. We'll talk about what it truly is, which might be surprising for you, and then we'll talk about how to go about creating change without self-sabotaging. Now, this is a topic very close to my heart because I used to call myself the queen of self-sabotage. And even though I was quite successful in many areas of my life, with food, I would always find a way to sabotage no matter how well I was doing. And I would create beautiful eating plans. I would create the most perfect morning routines, and I would have all of the supplies ready to help me succeed. I would have my color-coded spreadsheets. I'd have every single part of my plan figured out in advance. And then I would find myself doing the exact opposite of what I intended. And not only would I not be eating healthy, but I would eat in horrible ways. I would binge so much. I would vow to have no cookies at all, and then I would be eating cookies every night for weeks. And most people, myself included, believe that when this happens, we lack willpower, that we lack discipline, or we think something is just fundamentally wrong with me, like I'm broken in some way. And I hear this all the time from my clients before we start working together. And they'll say things like, I know what to do. I just cannot seem to make myself do it. Or they'll say, maybe I secretly hate myself because why else would I keep sabotaging myself like this? When I care so much about my health, why would I be eating this way? So when most people think this way about self-sabotage, what do? Usually, we'll just create stricter rules to stick to, right? We'll try to muster up more of our willpower, leave ourselves very little room for error because we say, I need structure. I need no room to mess this up. So I need a very, very strict plan. And we'll say, this time I'm really going to stick to it. And some people will take this to an even more extreme level, and I've worked with some people who have done residential treatment programs or bariatric surgery, and the rationale behind those, they'll say, if I make it impossible for me to mess this up, then I'll finally succeed. So a lot of us will go to our own version of extremes to try to combat this mechanism of self-sabotage, because we know if we're left to our own devices, we will undo the hard work that we've just done, or we won't even get to the good work because we'll have sabotaged before we even started. So right now, what I would like to do is look at self-sabotage in a new light so you can see that self-sabotage is not actually a lack of willpower. It's not actually that you hate yourself or that you're broken or that something is wrong with you. Self-sabotage is actually self-protection. Self-sabotage is self-preservation. I'm going to explain this because this completely changed how I approach change. When we understand that what self-sabotage actually is your mind and your body trying to protect you, we can no longer approach it in the way that we've been approaching it. Self-sabotage is self-protection. It's self-preservation. Now, I want to explain this on a few levels because this happens on a physical level, it happens on a psychological, mental, emotional level, and it happens on subconscious levels as well. Your entire system, your whole body system, is wired for survival, for protection, for your own self-preservation. So when we perceive any kind of threat, our protective mechanisms will kick in for survival, for your protection, for your self-preservation. They're trying to keep you safe, but we're approaching change in a dysfunctional way. So we perceive that we're self-sabotaging, but really our body and minds are doing exactly what they're supposed to, given the dysfunctional way that we're trying to change. So let me give you just a couple examples here of what I'm talking about. Let's start at the physical level with our most basic survival instincts. So back to the start of human history, when our ancestors faced food scarcity or famine, their bodies developed ways to protect themselves. So their bodies would do things like slow down the metabolism, increase hunger signals, storing fat more efficiently. These were life-saving adaptations. And your body still has these mechanisms. So when you drastically reduce your calories or you're following rigid food rules, your body has this memory of what to do. It registers food scarcity alert, 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 and it activates all of these protective responses. That's why when you go on a diet, you have very intense cravings. That's why when most people, and this is true statistically, more than 90% of people go on a diet, they gain the weight back. And many people gain the weight back plus more. Why? Because your body is learning to protect itself from famine, from starvation. This is how the body is behaving from a survival perspective. This is your body working in your favor. We just don't want that to happen. So we say, I always sabotage myself. But really, we're approaching change in a very misguided way where we're threatening our own biology, our own physiology. And then we're just blaming ourselves that we can't stick to anything. But the self-sabotage is actually what should be working. Your body's working actually very well. The problem is we were going about the change in a dysfunctional way that triggered these responses. So this is true on a physical level, but it's also true on a mental, emotional, and psychological level too. I'll give you another example. So when you've thought of yourself in a certain way for years or decades, like maybe in your own mind you call yourself a binge eater or a food addict or someone who's constantly struggling with weight or someone who's just totally out of control around food or someone who can't be trusted around food. How many times have you repeated that kind of thought to yourself? This becomes your identity. And your ego will do anything it can to preserve your identity. There's a man named Gay Hendricks who authored a book. I can't remember the name of the book in this moment, but the concept that he coined was on upper limits. And essentially what he talks about is we all have an internal thermostat for how much success or happiness or health we believe we should have or we believe we deserve. This isn't even necessarily a conscious thing, but we all have this idea of what is our temperature set on the thermostat. So when we try to exceed that limit too quickly, what does a thermostat do? It brings itself back down. So if the thermostat is set for a certain temperature and then it becomes too hot, right, it will adjust itself to come back to the baseline. We do that too. When we try to change too quickly or dramatically, we unconsciously do things to bring ourselves back down to what we see as our comfort zone. So, when you try to make a big dramatic change to your eating habit, you're not just challenging the physical. You're challenging your entire identity if you see yourself as someone who has no control around food, who can't seem to force yourself to eat healthy for any long period of time. If you call yourself a binge eater, your ego will try to preserve that identity. Its job is to protect your identity. So when you do something like have a binge or eat totally outside of your plan or just blow the whole thing, this is one of the factors at play. In other episodes, I talk about other factors too. There's many factors, but this is a big one at a core level because this is how we're approaching change. Even if we desperately want the change, we really, really want it. If we're approaching that change in a dysfunctional way that threatens your ego, that threatens your identity, there will be some kind of backlash. If you've been telling yourself, I'm a binge eater or I have no control around food, these thoughts have probably been repeated so many times that they feel like the absolute truth. When you try to act differently, your ego will step in to protect that identity, even if it's an identity that you don't even want anymore. And on a subconscious level, and Gay Hendricks talks about this in his book, many people notice that they tend to sabotage themselves before something big, like a wedding or a vacation or a presentation, depending on what your patterns are, right? So this isn't because you don't want to succeed. It's because the success in that area that you're seeking is currently beyond your upper limit. So it feels threatening to the identity and your protective mechanisms kick in. So what can we take away from this? When you start to see these patterns as protective rather than destructive, something amazing happens. Because then instead of beating yourself up for sabotaging your progress, you can start to see with compassion that there are parts of yourself that are just trying to keep you safe. And this completely changed how I approached the way that I change. When I want to improve or change certain habits that I have, I no longer approach it the way I used to. I used to use willpower and food rules trying to force the change. Now that I know that this is a dysfunctional way to approach change because it triggers all of these protective mechanisms, I approach change in a way that feels safe to my system. Now I know that if there's some kind of relapse or some kind of rebellion, I don't say, oh, there's something wrong with me or I need more willpower. I acknowledge what I tried to do threatened my safety. Maybe not on a mental level, but certainly on a subconscious level. There is a part of me that feels like this habit is safe. And we can see it with food all the time. For many of us who struggle with food, yes, we see it as an enemy, but we also see it as a friend. We see it as a comfort, right? We see it as what we go to after a long, hard day. We see it as our way to unwind. We see it as our way to numb ourselves when we just want to turn off our brains and not think anymore. So in this way, food is providing us safety. Food is providing us comfort. So when you try to go on some strict diet and just strip away any bit of safety and comfort that you have, of course there will be a rebellion, because what your body and mind are trying to do is protect you. So if we can now learn to approach the changes that we want, but in a healthy and harmonious way that doesn't threaten our own perceived version of this safety and this comfort, that's when change can really happen. And this is exactly what my clients go through in my Food Freedom Intensive. Instead of trying to make these huge, dramatic, painful changes that trigger these threatened responses, we work with very strategic, tiny habits that feel safe to your system. And we make these changes gradually but very consistently, so your system gets used to the change, but it's still subtle enough that your protective mechanisms don't need to kick in. So you can think about it this way. If you want to tame a wild horse, you wouldn't just run right up to it and jump on its back, right? That's a very dangerous thing to do. Instead, what you would do is you'd approach slowly. You might not even get on the horse's back on the first day or even the first week. But what you do is you would build trust over time to show the horse you are not a threat. You are safe. And then as the horse trusts you, then you can get on the horse's back, no problem, and you can ride freely. And a lot of us think that when we approach change in this way, the change will be too slow. And a lot of us fear slowness because we want the change fast, and that's our personality. That's why we've been attracted to such dramatic methods of change, why we've gone on the strict plans, why we've done all these extreme things to meet our goals. But the problem with that is we haven't met our goals. We've just cycled, and that is not change. That is stagnation. That is a roller coaster. So we think that approaching change in a more gradual way is slower, but in reality, it's actually faster. I recently had a client share with me that in her first 10 days of doing this work, she saw more change than she had seen in 25 years of working with nutritionists and dietitians and psychotherapists and so many other diets and programs. She said in 10 days, she saw more change. Why is that? Because when you show up in small but strategic ways and you do it consistently, the compound effect takes place. Think about compounding when it comes to money. Think about compound interest. The way compound interest works is if you invest, even if it's a small amount, but you invest very consistently over a long period of time, you build wealth. Whereas some people will just go for the quick fix, right? They'll put a whole bunch of money into something much more risky, and then they could end up losing it all. But when you invest in something stable that just grows in increments over time, and you invest consistently and build that habit, then it's nearly inevitable that you will build wealth. And the same thing happens with our health. When we invest regularly, consistently, even if it's smaller amounts, what we build is true, sustainable health. But if we're just on again, off again all the time, and we don't build any kind of consistency, and we're constantly threatening our mind, our body, so that they're being triggered into going into all these protective mechanisms and sabotaging everything we're doing, we're never going to get there. One of my clients, Amy, she had been binge eating for 42 years before she found me, and she had tried everything, every diet under the sun, therapy. She did programs where she had no flour, no sugar for months, and she always fell off the wagon. And what she told herself was that she didn't have the willpower, that she would self-sabotage, but really that's not what was happening. There were other mechanisms at play, and largely this mechanism of self-sabotage was really her trying to protect herself at a deeper level. So when we made these small, gradual changes, she started already feeling different within her first week. And after a few months of working together, she said, I don't even think I could binge the way I used to if I tried. Like, I don't even think I could do it. Why does that happen? Because when you make these small changes over time, you start to build a new identity. And the binge eating is no longer aligned with that new identity. You can hear it also. I recently recorded a podcast a few episodes down with Hannah, who was one of my past clients. And she said, I feel like a totally different person. She said, when I look back on that person who was binge eating for 25 years and crying and feeling so desperate and so hopeless around this, I can see that person, but I no longer feel like I am that person. Like, it feels like I'm looking at another life. And this is what happens when we make true sustainable change. It doesn't feel like we're just trying to always stick to a plan. What it feels like is that we're now a different person. We're still ourselves, of course, but we have a new level of the thermostat where we just can't even imagine being at that old temperature. So it's crucial that when you're approaching a significant change, like creating really wonderful health or ending binge eating, that you understand these different parts of yourself and how they work. Not just how they work individually, but how they work together. How your body can work with your mind, how your mind can work with your body and your emotions. Because now you're working with yourself as a team instead of constantly fighting yourself. And only when you work as a team, that's when a truly healthy relationship with food can become lasting. And that's exactly what we do in the Food Freedom Intensive. It's not a program to stick to. It's a system where you learn how to work with your body, with your mind, and all these different parts of yourself as a team rather than fighting against yourself. And when you do that, the binge cravings go away. You can achieve all of your health goals, but not in a way that's going to trigger sabotage. So the takeaway here is you're not broken. You don't actually lack willpower. Your self-sabotage is actually your self-protection. And when you learn to work with these mechanisms instead of against them, that's when lasting change becomes possible. So I hope that helps, so you can not only understand this better, but also feel more compassion for yourself. That your body, your mind are working exactly as they're supposed to. And your job is to work with them. And by the way, if you want my help going through this process, if you want to go through our proven structure in the Food Freedom Intensive to build this kind of long-lasting, sustainable change around food, you can go to katiepapo.com/resources and you'll be signed up for my email list, because I'm not accepting new clients just yet, but I will open up new spaces at the end of March 2025. So you can join my email list, and in the meantime, I'll be sending out every week a new tip or practical insight that you can start to think about or implement regarding your own relationship to food. So you can go to katiepapo.com/resources and you'll get the weekly tip, and you'll also get the announcement when it's ready. All right, I'll talk to you soon and see you next week.
Thank you for spending time with me today.
If you're ready to take the next step in your journey, become a food freedom insider at katiepapo.com/resources. You'll get free practical guidance and instant access to my foundations class. That's katiepapo.com/resources. New podcast episodes come out every week, so subscribe to the podcast now. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a kind review. It's very meaningful to me, and it helps other people find freedom too. I appreciate you so much, and I hope to help you further on your journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and others. See you next week.